One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Okay, it's not often that I come here and start talking about things that I don't really know about. Like, I don't know the ins and outs of something, and I don't really have a whole bunch of stories to share about it, and I just don't really know it super, super well. But that's what I'm going to do today. Okay, I'm like stretching beyond my comfort zone, which I tell y'all to do this all the time. So I just want to say, like, I'm preaching. What is it? Like, I'm practicing what I'm preaching. That's what I meant. I was thinking talk the talk, walk the walk, like that whole thing, right? I'm trying to do all of that because I think it's important that I show you I'm getting out of my comfort zone, so you also have the permission to get out of your comfort zone. So what we're talking about today is whether or not you should have a co-host for your podcast. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so like I told you, I don't typically like talking about things that I don't really know a lot about, and that is being or having a co-host for a podcast. But I see these questions all the time, whether it's in our Profit Podcast online community. So shout out all of y'all in our Facebook group. Like, this question comes up a lot. It's, hey, I think I need a co-host, or I think I want to get a co-host. How does that happen? How will that work? And I see this in other podcasting communities that I'm a part of online. So I know that this question is out there. So instead of ignoring it and kind of sweeping it under the rug and saying, I'm just not going to deal with those podcasters, those people that have that question, that's not really fair, right? Because even if you have a solo podcast right now, but at some point you're approached by a friend that says, hey, do you want to do a podcast together? Maybe you could keep your solo show and still do a podcast with someone else. And so you're having these same questions. So I really want to address all the different ways that we can approach having a podcast, having a co-hosted podcast. So I'm going to give you 5 things that I want you to consider. And then we're going to go into the pros and cons of having a co-host for your show. And then I'm going to give you some examples of co-hosted shows that I listen to on a regular basis that you can go check out, and you can listen to the different dynamics that these people have. Okay. So like I said, first and foremost, we're going to dive into the things to consider when you're looking for a co-host. Now, there could be many situations that you're just like, I just don't want to do it by myself. I want to, have someone else to be there with me. And we're going to talk about that. But this is what I often see a lot of new podcasters. They just don't want to feel that kind of ickiness that comes with doing a solo show. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I didn't have my own reservations whenever I started my podcast for the very first time and I did my solo show, because that's not how I started. I started doing interviews. That was the first thing that I thought of when I was like, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. Who can I interview? I never thought, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to go talk to myself in a room with some notes in front of me and hope that I don't sound like a complete idiot. Nope. That's not how this podcast journey has looked for me. And I want to be very open and transparent about that, because I think that that's a real struggle that a lot of people kind of walk through in the solo journey. Now, having gone through it, and I mean, I can't even tell y'all, like, just the daily podcast alone is more than 250 episodes at this point. So I've done a lot of solo shows now. So I feel very, very comfortable doing that. But in looking back at that beginning stage right before I started recording interviews, I remember thinking, I don't want to do this alone. So if that's you, you're like, that's why you're considering having a co-host for your podcast. I get it. I see you. I totally understand where this train of thought is coming from. So I just wanted to say that to kind of validate that I see you, I get you, I understand you, and I'm coming at you with the best information possible that I can, even though I have never co-hosted an entire podcast, right? I've done interviews, I've done live streams where I've co-hosted with people, but I have never co-hosted an entire podcast. But here are the 5 things that I want you to consider before you dive in, because it's a relationship. Y'all, I want you to think about this like any other important relationship in your life where you've chosen to be there, right? Like maybe not all of your family relationships, because maybe you're like forced to be there. You're like, I'm related to these people. I can't get away from them. Like, this is a different kind of relationship, but I'm talking about the people that are your friends, your partners in life. Like, you've chosen to be around these people. So the thing that I want to address first and foremost is a schedule. Now, I have heard from many people that either have co-hosts where it's gone terribly wrong, or a situation where one person was more into it than another. And that's why I bring up schedules first and foremost, because y'all, I'm a planner. Okay. If you didn't know this about me, I sit down every Sunday and I look at what's on my Google Calendar for the next week. I write down the important dates. Like I fill in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I put on there workout, because if it's not on the calendar, it does not happen. And so I wouldn't be a great pair to team up with somebody who is just like, yeah, like, you sure record, like, maybe, yeah, I'll see if I feel like it. Oh my gosh, no, I cannot be in a schedule with someone that's wishy-washy, or even someone that's like, oh, can we do that at 10 o'clock at night? Like, that would work best for me. Y'all, I get up at 5. I'm in bed, asleep on most nights before 9:30 p.m. No joke. So that would not work with my schedule. So whoever you're considering to join in a partnership as a co-host of your podcast, you got to get on the same page. You got to have some sort of understanding of a schedule, whether it's you're going to get together once a month on a Saturday and you're just going to record 4 episodes back to back. That will be all of your monthly content. I think, honestly, that would probably work best if I was in a co-hosting relationship, simply because I'm busy and like The kids have unpredictable schedules sometimes. Like we're actually getting into soccer season right now, and we have practices on the weekdays and we have games on the weekends, and we still want to go visit family and like see other people. And it's just really hard to think about, I would have to juggle with someone else's schedule and not really have control of when everything's going to happen. Whereas right now, as a solo podcast, like I don't have a regular co-host on my show. I have a lot of control over my schedule when I do interviews, when I record solo episodes. So that's definitely one thing to consider when you're looking for a co-host. Now, the second thing, and this is really important, and actually number 2 and 3 kind of go together, but the second one is motivation levels. Okay. I often see people get into some sort of working relationship, whether it's a partnership or your co-host, or you're like, you know what, I think we're going to be, someone's like an affiliate for someone else. And they're like, oh, I want you to treat this program like it's yours as well. And like, I have seen people do this really well and really poorly, where you can tell just by looking at people's faces who is in it and who isn't. Like you can tell that they're just like, I cannot wait for this to be over with. And the other person is excited. They're passionate. Like, could you imagine? Okay, let's just think for a second. If you've been around here for a second, you know how excited I get about podcasting. You know that I geek out on it and I get like if you heard last week's episode with Carrie Ann, like we both love podcasting and we get so fired up, so into it. If the person that I was co-hosting with didn't have that same amount of passion about podcasting, it would not work out. It would not work out really fast for me too, because if we went to, like let's say we scheduled, we're like, okay, we're going to, Squadcast or Zoom or whatever. We were going to set up, me and my co-host, and I'm like, okay, let's do this. Like, I'm excited. Like, aren't you excited about today's topic? Like, it's going to be so much fun. And they're like, can we just get this over with? Because I got like 10 other things to do. And I don't really want to be here. Like, I'm like making all those mouth noises because that's what I feel like. Like, that's how it would make me feel inside if someone was not as motivated about podcasting as I am. So you want to make sure that your motivation levels are similar. They don't have to be the same, but you don't want to be like carrying all the energy, all the load, like creating all the content, and the other person is just, because they're just going to drag you down. Like I'm imagining like a weight that you're pulling behind you and it's slowly dragging you down. So find someone with the same motivation level about the topic that you have. Number 3 is goals. So like I said, number 2 and 3 kind of tie in together, but you want to make sure that you have the same goals. Like you don't want one person that says, okay, we're going to start this podcast. We're going to make a whole bunch of money. We're going to monetize it. We're going to sell merchandise. We're going to go into a lot of debt to get all this inventory and like all the things. The other person's like, I want to do everything organically. I don't want to pay for ads. I don't want to pay for any advertising. Like we're just going to do a whole bunch of content. And then we'll eventually, like after we grow an audience and we got some consistency and maybe we have some sponsors that we've talked to or partners that we can affiliate with, like any of that, like that's not going to work for me. So you need to talk about that like up front, because I've seen so many times that co-hosting relationships begin and over time they figure out, oh, they're more motivated than I am, or their goal was to grow their business while the other person's was to just get out there. They just wanted to put their name out there on the internet. Well, one person's probably going to be more motivated than the other. So that's absolutely something to consider. So motivation levels and goals go into the same category. They are 100% aligned with something you need to consider when you're looking for a co-host. Okay, and then number 4 kind of rolls back up into schedules, and it's similar, but it's consistency. So when I say consistency, if you've been around here for a while, you know that we preach consistency. Consistency and value are 2 of our core principles here. And if someone is looking to show up every single day. They're like, I want to podcast every single day at the same time, the same place. We're going to make it happen. Like, come rain or shine, come hell or high water. Like, I want to podcast every single day. And the other person is like, oh, I was thinking like once a month. Like that would work for my schedule and what I can do. I'm just going to say once a month.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Up front, again, with the schedules and everything, you have to be consistent. So whether that is once a month or every single day or once a week or twice a week or once a week with a few bonus episodes sprinkled in here or there, you've got to make these decisions up front. You cannot go into this and say, well, when we have time and when we can get together, maybe we'll publish an episode on a Tuesday and then maybe next week, like on a Thursday because someone had to cancel and reschedule. And then we'll probably show up on a Friday next time because that's just what worked out. And then, oh crap, we forgot. So we needed to do it on a Sunday and we aired it that night. That is not consistency. That is not a way to grow something that is habitual in your listener's routine. This is why consistency is so important. I hear people tell me all the time, I listen to you on my weekly trips, like whenever I'm walking the dog. I listen to your podcast when I'm folding laundry. These are things that are baked into someone's routine. It is like a psychological habit whenever it comes to podcasting. Like my example is I listen to the Office Ladies podcast every Wednesday, either whenever I'm getting ready or I'm working out. That is when I listen to this podcast. And the reason why I know that, I can tell you exactly when I listen to them, is because those are the days that I work out. And those are the days when my son isn't at school. And so I have a longer time to get ready on those days. And I'll take my time. Like I take, a leisurely shower. I blow dry my hair. I put in my AirPods. Like I can listen to it. And I just know this. So I want your show to be part of your listeners' habits, but you cannot do that if you are not consistent. Okay, so that's number 4. And then number 5 is messaging. So whenever we go back to the principle of why are you creating this podcast, right? The goals and the motivation levels, messaging is so important because you don't want one host to feel one way and another host to feel radically different unless that is the premise of your show. Right? Maybe that is the entertainment part of, why it would make a fantastic co-hosted show is because you're going to butt heads and that sounds exhausting. I'm not a super confrontational person, so I can't imagine. That sounds emotionally exhausting to show up to a podcast and just know it's almost like getting roasted. Do y'all remember the Comedy Central roast, where people just tear you down? That sounds traumatizing, terrifying, and I would not want to do that with a co-host on a regular basis. So you want to have your messaging that is aligned, and you want to make sure it's not confusing. I do see some podcasts that do have co-host, and it doesn't feel consistent. It feels like one person's leaning one way, the other person is leaning the other, and then the listener is just kind of there in the middle, and they're like, why am I here again? I don't really agree with what they're saying. And what they're saying is contradicting what he's saying. And what she's saying is why am I listening to this again? So you want to make sure that even if you aren't always on the same page with how your views and your opinions, you want to be on the same page with your overall messaging of your show. So that is something to consider. So I'm going to do a quick recap. These are the 5 things to consider. 1, your schedules, 2, your motivation levels, 3, your goals, 4, consistency, and 5, messaging. Those are the top 5 things I would tell you to consider before jumping like head first off the deep end, into a co-hosting partnership or relationship. Now let's talk about some of the pros and cons. We've mentioned some of these like subtly here and there, but I have a few pros. So like I said from the very beginning, you don't have to talk to yourself. If you have a co-host, you have someone that you can rely on every single week or every time you record a show. So you don't have to stand in a room, talk to yourself super uncomfortably and feel like this is really awkward. You have someone that you can catch and pitch with, and you can bounce ideas with, and you can just have open, candid conversations. Now, this is a huge pro, but I also have to follow that up with a con simply because you could probably go off on a lot of tangents, right? Like it may get into that area of, what are we even talking about anymore? What was the main topic of why we came here to record today? So if that's the case, I would always recommend setting a time limit for how long you're going to record. This is how I keep myself very short and concise with my message because I always have a time limit. I don't just come in here when, like even today recording this episode, I don't just come in and say, oh, I have an infinite amount of time to record. No, I come in with the objective to be under 30 minutes on a podcast episode. And then when I look at it and I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm like almost 20 minutes in, I need to like make sure I'm wrapping it up and I get all the important points in this episode before time runs out. So make sure that you're restricting yourself and your co-host to a time limit so you don't just go all over the place. Okay, the next pro that I have is you can rely on someone else's knowledge and expertise. Now, Melanie, so shout out Melanie and Heather Sager. They are 2 of my business besties, and we recently did a podcast interview together. I'll link to it in the show notes, but we were talking about having like a peer mastermind and like being able to rely on them and talk to them during that interview was so fulfilling. It opened up something inside of me that I thought, man, I sound really a lot more like myself in that episode than I have on some episodes of this podcast because I was relying on them. Like I knew I didn't have to bring everything to the table because I could rely on them to ask great follow-up questions or to take the conversation in a new direction that I wasn't expecting. So it's kind of like it keeps everything fresh and you kind of have to stay on your toes. So if you have a co-host, you don't always have to rely on your own expertise and knowledge. You can really branch out and rely on your co-host as well. So it's a great like co-working experience as long as both of you are carrying the same amount of weight. Okay, this is where the con comes in, is you both have to be motivated and strongly encouraged to show up and show out every single time you create an episode. And then the last pro that I have to share is it's fun to chat with someone else. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it's fun, especially, in this last year of the pandemic. It is so much fun whenever I get to chat with my friends, my business besties, or I get on a podcast interview with someone. It's so much fun because it feels like it's social hour. So I know that there are some podcasts out there that they do this as a co-host for that very reason. Maybe you both work at home. Maybe one of you is across the country from another and you're just like, man, I just love to chat with you on a regular basis because it would just fulfill me. Like as the social aspect of my life, it would just make me so much happier if I was relying on someone else to have a fantastic conversation about a topic that you're both passionate about. So those are my pros. Now we're going to kind of get into the cons, okay? The cons that I see, again, this is not my firsthand experience, but these are some of the things that I've seen other people ask or what I would consider before I got into a co-hosting relationship. The first one is, will you outgrow one another? Now, the reason why I ask that is because maybe both of you, when you enter into this relationship, one of you may be further along. Okay, this happens all the time where I see 2 people, it's like they start at the same starting line. And then one person it seems like they're exponentially getting faster and faster, and they're having more success than the other person. And going back to what we were talking about, like that weight, like somebody weighing you down, I would not, and this goes back to the motivation and the goals and all of that. This is why this is important to talk about it before you get into that relationship, because it's like, are you going to outgrow one another? Is one of you going to get featured in Forbes or Entrepreneur or Inc., and then the other person's going to say, hey, like WTF, why wasn't I invited? And why? And they're like, oh, well, this is something not related to the podcast. This is for my business or my side hustle. Like, don't worry, like I'm going to come back to you. But I see this like tension that would come up if one person starts to outgrow the other. So think about that before you get into a co-hosting relationship, or if you're already in a co-hosting space and you're like, man, what kind of questions should we be asking? Have this conversation. Maybe that sounds weird to say. It's almost like couples therapy. Hi, I'm Crystal and I'm your podcast therapist. I would like to counsel you on how we can make your show better together. That was a really creepy therapist voice, right? all my therapists out there, don't be mad at me for doing that, but it felt right in the moment, and I immediately regret it because it was really creepy. So, will you outgrow one another? I can't answer that question for you. Neither can you, but I would want you to like kind of play out a scenario in your head with knowing what you would do if that kind of just came up. I don't know. I guess this is me being risk averse, and I want to know what I'm getting into before I get into it. And this is a question that I would want to know. You know, what's the plan? What's the plan if something like this were to happen? The next con is what happens if someone wants out, like they want out of the relationship, but the other person wants to keep going with their podcast. Ooh, now we're in like couples counseling. Ooh, what if someone wants a podcast divorce? What do you do? What if one person says, you know what, I'm just not feeling this, or I thought I was going to have more time. It turns out I don't. I'm in the crazy busy season of my life and I just don't have time for this. Does that mean you shut down this podcast and the other person can start another one by themselves or with someone else? Ooh, this is like, ooh, adultery. We don't want none of that to happen. Or does it mean one person just leaves, like they vanish, and the other person goes on about their business and handles the podcast by themselves? I don't know. Like I said, these are the questions. These are I call this a con simply because it feels really frictiony and it feels really like a tense situation if someone wants out, but the other person's like, oh no, like you may be done. I'm having a blast. I'm having the time of my life. I don't want to be done with this podcast. You can go, but how would we split things up? And this is the last con is, what about splitting up assets and revenue when you start making money? That can all be super, super messy if it's not handled properly. I've heard of many people talk about, starting a business with someone else, it's like a partner, and then they're just like, I want out. I don't want to do this anymore, and I want my half of everything. Or do you set up a situation where like you have an LLC and both of you, like you commit so much money or so much cash and one of you is majority owner? Do you own everything 50-50? It's like, there's a lot of things. And I know that you're listening and maybe you're just getting started and you're like, Crystal, we're not making any money anyway. Like, why would we even worry about that? Because I want you to think about it, because I want you to be so committed in your success as a podcaster, not monetarily, not talking about downloads and how big your platform is, but I want you to love it so much that you want it to succeed. And whenever that happens, magical things happen. That's when brands come to you and say, I want to work with you. That's when affiliate opportunities arise that you never would have thought about. And just really cool things happen whenever you go all in with your podcast. So I want you to have these conversations of, if we're going to do this, we're going to be co-host of this podcast. What happens if someone wants out? And what happens if we're already making money? Do we need to establish like that financial boundary from the very beginning and put all of our money, like all our expenses, all the income is going to go into one account that is the LLC's money? I know. It's like a lot of you are listening and you're like, I'm just getting started. I was just getting started too, but these were still questions that I asked myself from the very beginning because they're that important. And maybe this is just the way my brain works. Maybe it's just how I am, my financial brain works, but I just want to have answers to a lot of these questions. And I don't have to have all the answers, but I at least want to ask the questions before we go all in. And it's 5 years into a co-hosting relationship. Someone wants out, you're super successful already, and then it looks really messy. It looks really messy for one person to get out. So think about these things. I am now your podcast therapist is exiting because I want to tell you about some amazing co-host shows because I want you to see how they are done. So these are some of my favorite podcasts. If you've never heard of these before or you're just like, Crystal, these are all ridiculous podcasts, that's okay. You can judge my podcast. I don't care. You can judge my podcast listening. These are my favorite. Okay, these are my favorite. These are ones that I listen to all the time. Some of them I listen to every week. Some of them I listen to kind of more sporadically, but they're some of my favorite ones. And yes, they're all celebrity podcasts. I'm going to tell you that right now because this is what I enjoy listening to. So you can go to the show notes where you're listening to this, crystalprofit.com/episode 235. And I'm going to link to these shows. And I'm actually going to link to a specific podcast episode of my podcast that I want you to go listen to because I think you should check out all these shows. They're phenomenal. I love comedic podcasts. This is my thing. It's my jam. And if you want to see exactly what I listen to every single week, go follow me on Good Pods. I'm going to link to Good Pods in the show notes. This is the app that I listen to. I put star ratings on there. I put my number one takeaways on there. And if you want to kind of get a peek into what I listen to on a regular basis, go follow me on Good Pods. So first and foremost, Office Ladies. Y'all, you know this. You know that Office Ladies is my favorite podcast. You know this. So I did a case study about Office Ladies and how they launched the podcast. And this is so funny because, and we talked about this last week whenever we were reviewing the podcast stats and the YouTube stats, but it's my number one most downloaded podcast episode. And I cannot for the life of me figure out why. I don't know if it's that y'all love the Office Ladies podcast too, and you just wanted to know what I was talking about, but go listen to that episode. So episode 133 of the Profit Podcast, I do a case study on Office Ladies, but y'all, it's a co-hosted show. It's Angela Kinsey and Jenna Fisher. I got Angela Fisher in my head, and I'm like, that's not right. Angela Kinsey and Jenna Fisher. These are Pam and Angela from The Office. They're the actors that played them, and they're best friends in real life. So I wanted to kind of point out some things about each one of these shows, but they already had an established relationship before they started a podcast. And that's really how all of these people are. Like all the shows that I'm mentioning here today. So whenever I see people that say, hey, I'm looking for a co-host of my show, that is a red flag. That is, please don't go be a co-host with a show with someone who is a complete stranger. Please don't do it. If you're going to do a co-host, get to know the person for a little bit. Going back to the couples counseling, dating reference, get to know them for a while before you go in. Because this is a commitment. Whether it's one Saturday every single month, it's still a commitment to show up, and you just want to know someone for a little bit. But the reason why this show works so well is because they know each other in and out. They share personal stories. They share their quirks. They share just so many incredible things, but also the behind the scenes of the show, The Office. And there's really cool actors and guest appearances on the podcast. So it's one of my favorites, but I think what makes it work so well is because these two are just a freaking riot. They're so funny. They say the darndest things, and I don't know, they're just so candid in how they share on the podcast. So that's the number one show that I'm going to tell you to go listen to if you want to hear how a great co-hosted show is run, not just with the podcast, but also with their ads. They do a really great job at their advertisements. And I know most people are like, I fast forward through all the ads. I don't listen to them. Well, if you're trying to get ideas on how to create your own podcast ads with a co-host, I recommend you slow down. You don't fast forward through all of them because you want to hear how other people do it. So that is a absolute podcast that I would recommend. The next one is Smartless. Again, with the comedic podcast, this one is actually hosted by 3 people because I haven't gotten this question a lot, but I think that it would be really challenging to have a 3-person co-hosted show where every time all 3 people are on there. So it's Will Arnett. Yes, it's Batman from the Lego movie. He's been in so many other things, but it's with my 3 boys, that's the first thing that I default to. I'm Batman. And then we have Jason Bateman and then Sean Hayes. I was thinking Will because I was thinking Will and Grace, but Sean Hayes. So Will Arnett, Jason Bateman, and Sean Hayes. Y'all, they are so funny. They're so funny. They have incredible guests. Oh my gosh, the guests that they have on their show, because again, I am a comedic, like comedy nut. I love listening to these actors, actresses, but they also have really interesting people on their podcast. So go listen to that show. They also do a really cool job of their advertisements, but they don't always have all 3 of them in the ad. They'll have 1 or 2 of them. They kind of do like a catch and pitch, like, hey, you know, they do a lot of AutoZone. And so they'll like say, hey, my car broke down and did this and that. And they're like, oh, well, you know, you're stupid. Why didn't you do this? But that's their dynamic. Again, they've all been friends for a really long time. And so they can throw in their personalities into their ads. I know I geek out on the ad stuff, but I really, truly enjoy listening to how other people do their shows. Okay, so I have 2 more references for co-hosts, and then we're going to wrap this up. Sibling rivalry. Now, I thought this was sibling rivalry until I was like, wait, what are they actually saying? So this is Kate and Oliver Hudson. I'm sure you know Kate Hudson, Oliver Hudson, Goldie Hawn's children, right? And this is just so good. This started, I want to say it was almost 2 years ago that they started this podcast. Maybe it hasn't been quite that long, but revelry, I didn't know this. I looked it up. This is how dorky I am. I looked at the definition of revelry because I'm like, what does that even mean? Why am I thinking this is? So it's lively and noisy festivities, especially when these involve drinking a large amount of alcohol. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I totally get it because these 2 are so zany, crazy. So they're brother and sister, and they talk about like sibling things. They share their stories of growing up, and then they talk to other siblings. Like they've had the Kardashian sisters on there, and they've had other famous siblings that want to share. They've had Gary Chapman was on one of their recent episodes talking about the 5 love languages and how to apply those with siblings and your family and your kids. So they have a really broad audience and a broad, like, just kind of appeal to a lot of people. And they remind me of me and my oldest brother and how we interact. Like, it's kind of that love, like, I love you, but I'm also going to push you and I'm going to annoy you and like kind of rat you out and do all those things. And they just remind me of me and my brother. And so I love this podcast. It's so good. But that's one of the ones where I kind of get kind of choosy on who the siblings are if I want to listen to them, because some of them I'm like, I don't care about them, but I will listen to this on a regular basis. But it's more like a few times a month. And then the last one, that's really funny. My brother's actually the one that I was just talking about. His ears must have been burning because he's calling me right now. I'm going to call him back in a second. But the last one that I want to tell you about is Armchair Expert. This is probably my second favorite. I don't know. Between Office Lady, Smartless, and Armchair Expert, I listen to these 3 on a very regular basis, at least every week, once a week. Some of them come out with more episodes, like either a bonus episode or Armchair Expert comes out with at least 2 episodes a week, I believe. But it's Dax Shepard and Monica Padman. Again, they had a connection before they started their show. And their connection was Monica used to work and collaborate with Kristen Bell. That's Dax's wife. And she kind of came into the fold of like their family unit, working with them and everything. They have this really awesome dynamic. And Monica is around my age. I want to say she's either my age or a year younger than me. And I'm 34. For anybody that does it, like right now, me recording this, I'm 34. And Dax is closer to my husband's age. My husband's almost 9 years older than me. And so I love the dynamic that these two have. They're so different, but also so similar in different ways. And they just have a great way of showing up, asking hard questions of each other, and being very, very real, very real. And I just love it. I love it so much, but it goes back to, I don't think that you could just meet somebody and say, hey, want to be my co-host? And it work out really well. I don't think that that's possible. I think that you have to have some sort of existing foundation to really make this work. But y'all, that's all I have for you today. So you have a lot of homework. You have a lot of homework. If you've been thinking about having a co-host on your podcast, you have a lot of things to consider. You have some pros and cons, and you have some shows that you should go check out and see if this is the route that you want to go. And go listen to these podcasts, y'all. I'm telling you, like some of your favorite people in the world are on these shows, and they're so good. Oh, they're so stinking good. Even for the production value alone, I think that you should go listen to hear the different ways that people produce their shows. Maybe it's just me and my nerdiness, but I appreciate it. So that's all I have for you today. So make sure you go check out the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 235, and you're going to see everything that we talked about here today. If this is your first time tuning in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Take a screenshot wherever you're listening to this and tell me what your number one takeaway was. Tag me on social media. Tag me on Instagram. So for people that don't know how to do this, take a screenshot on your phone, go to your Instagram profile, swipe right, and then you will be able to add a story. That's where I want you to put it. Go put it in your stories and tag @CrystalProfitTX and say, this episode was so good. Or I learned that I don't want to have a co-host, or maybe I need to find a co-host. Whatever your takeaway is, I want you to reach out and let me know what you found valuable with this episode. So again, the show notes are crystalprofit.com/episode 235. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.